I just want to first extend my thanks to the RaceB4Race community for just welcoming me with open arms. At lunch today, Ruben and I were talking, and he said, you know, Ayana has a way of gathering people. And I thought, she's extended that to this room. She's gathered us for this, so thank you all so much. When we picture medieval angels, we usually imagine radiant, white-robed, and luminous beings, embodiments of purity and celestial order. But this angel refuses that expectation. She is eclectic in her eccentricity. Her feet planted on a moon whose color is worn, the angel opens up her interior, which takes on a mandorla-like shape. Nestled within her fiery interior is a sword. Black envelops her skin and hair, while green wings erupt from her back. She is resplendent in the amalgamation of color that engulfs her. What does it mean that this angel, an allegory of divine wisdom and transformation, is painted black? Today, I want to explore how this alchemical image models love not as purity, perfection, or transcendence, but as a process of becoming. A process that begins in blackness, remembers blackness, and depends on blackness. In a symposium that asks how we love in a time of turmoil, how race informs our capacity to love, how we build communities of love amid harm and refusal, I'm drawn to the way that the angel in a text known as the Aurora Consurgens imagines love through states of the soul, contrition, burning, illumination. Here, blackness is not sin, and it certainly is not race. It is the condition of humility and self-knowledge that makes love possible. Scholars of the Middle Ages have shown that blackness functioned as both a symbolic language, rich with meanings tied to interiority, repentance, and salvation, and as a framework for merging racial thinking. Yet, even within this hermeneutical tradition, blackness is often treated as static, the mark of sin awaiting purification, the darkness meant to be washed into white. The image of the black angel in the Aurora Consurgens disrupts this trajectory. Rather than casting blackness as a deficit to overcome, the image presents it as a profoundly human state, an acknowledgement of fragility, humility, and the broken, open heart. Medieval viewers were already accustomed to encountering holy black figures whose dark skin invited penitents to see themselves reflected in sanctity. But the Aurora angel goes further. It frames blackness not as an obstacle to illumination, but as the very ground from which love is able to take root. In this alchemical vision, blackness is generative, foundational, and indispensable, not a stain to be erased, but a condition to be remembered. The manuscript in which we find our black angel, the Aurora Consurgens, is a late medieval alchemical treatise, likely written in the 15th century, that stands at the intersection of alchemy and mystical theology. Believed in late Middle Ages to have been written by Thomas Aquinas, the Aurora Consurgens is now believed to have been penned by an anonymous author, a pseudo-Aquinas. Rather than presenting alchemy as a technical craft for producing gold, the Aurora describes the alchemical work as a process of interior remaking. The text is framed as a dialogue between the seeker and divine wisdom. Drawing heavily on the language of songs, it articulates transformation as an experience of desire, purification, and union. Now, I'm going to talk about the stages of the alchemical process. It will look different than the standard one. This text inverts it. So you might go, no, it doesn't happen at that point. Trust me, the Latin says it does. In the Aurora, color marks stages through which matter and the soul advances toward perfection. The soul descends into its own darkening, negretto, black. It is then ignited into the fiery ardor of rubetto, red, and lastly is clarified into the brightness of albedo, white. Through its exegetical work, the treatise recasts alchemy as a theology of becoming, making the transmutation of matter an allegory for the soul's own perfection. The manuscript I look at today contains the earliest surviving text of the Aurora, written and illustrated by monks at St. Gallen in the 15th century. Zurich Zentralbibliothek manuscript RH172 would originally have included 37 illustrations, 26 of which survive today. The illustrations have been attributed to multiple Almanic illuminators active in the Upper German region around 1400. The imagery is created primarily through confident pen outlines filled with delicate color washes, an economical yet highly expressive technique typical of South German visionary manuscripts. The style displays the angular drapery, elongated bodies, and vivid facial expressions associated with book painters working near Lakes Constance and Zurich. Although incomplete, manuscript RH172 preserves what appears to be the oldest textual layer of the work. Other witnesses, such as those held in libraries in Paris, Vienna, and Venice, transmit a more standardized form of the treatise. By contrast, manuscript RH172 offers an early and less harmonized version, one whose textual and pictorial choices, including the Black Angel, shed light on how the Aurora was circulated and interpreted at an earlier stage of transmission. This early and less harmonized manuscript preserves a version of the Aurora in which the treatise's spiritual logic appears with particular clarity, especially in the image cycle. It is precisely this alchemical spiritual arc that the Black Angel in manuscript RH172 renders visible, her body becoming the site where spiritual remaking takes form. Rather than illustrating the text's metaphors piecemeal, the illuminators gathers them into a single embodied figure whose very form conveys the soul's ascent. Her black skin and hair, negretto, the red mandorla at her center, rubetto, and the white dress, albedo, map the stages of the work onto a supernatural body. The Black Angel gives the internal and visible process of the soul's interior reorientation, shape, and presence, while still preserving its ethereality. She is not a human figure, but a supernatural vessel, an imagistic container for processes too abstract, too metaphysical to render otherwise. In her, the alchemical stages acquire physical presence without collapsing into literal flesh, making the soul's becoming both graspable and untouchable at once. In the Aurora carcinogens and related alchemical manuscripts, blackness is above all a hermeneutic device, a means to explain dissolution and transformation in symbolic language known to the reader. As the text explains, blackness is the soul's essential condition. And just as black earth is the womb of all seeds, so blackness is the womb of all perfection in metals. And such is blackness in spiritual things. When the heart of a human is broken and humbled under the hand of God and knows its weakness and knows its nothingness, and such a heart is apt to receive the light of wisdom and the heat of the love of God. Only in this humbled state, when the soul acknowledges its own insufficiency, can it receive the light of wisdom and heat of divine love. This aligns with logic of medieval devotion, where, as Cynthia Hahn notes, compunction is the necessary catalyst for spiritual awakening. The lives of the saints were designed to provoke that very moment. The faithful, confronted with deeds they could not imitate, were moved to tears of contrition. Gregory the Great describes this response in the dialogues when Peter the deacon confesses that hearing of the saints' miracles makes him, quote, more inclined to weep than to comment, end quote. Such weeping, born of humility and self-recognition, is a starting point of spiritual change. In the Aurora, Blackness visualizes that beginning. To envision Negretto as the skin and hair of the angel, the illuminator translates a spiritual condition, contrition, brokenness, humility, into the most material, vulnerable, and inescapably human surface of the body. In the late Middle Ages, skin was understood as a revelatory surface. It could signal character, disclose interior disposition, and mark place of origin. Though affected by climate or emotion, its color and countenance could not be shed. When the illuminator of the Aurora depicts Negretto not as atmosphere, cloud, or garment, but as skin, it signals that this stage of the soul's conversion is constitutive rather than peripheral, enduring rather than temporary, a part of the human condition. The angel's black skin thus renders Negretto fundamentally human. Because it appears on the skin, the most visible and exposed part of the body, the viewer encounters this condition not as abstraction, but as something deeply embodied and shared. Geraldine Hang has argued that the black skins of figures like Maurice offered medieval viewers a point of recognition, a surface upon which the penitent could perceive their own sin. The angel's black skin produces a related but distinct effect. Her blackness, or here blackness, does not mark inherited sin, but the essential generative condition of contrition itself. Painted on the body's most vulnerable and immutable surface, it insists that this humbled, broken, open state is fundamental. The angel shows blackness to be the container of divine love, the very site where change begins. In alchemical practice, rubetto marks the moment when matter, having progressed through Negretto, is struck by heat, quickened, and turned towards perfection. The author of the Aurora describes rubetto as, quote, that disposition towards perfection, when the heavenly heat approaches and warms the matter, which was previously moist and dissolved in Negretto, end quote. In the Zurich manuscript, this stage takes visual form in the red mandorla that the angel pulls open to reveal. Its shape unmistakably recalls representations of the side wound of Christ in late Middle Ages. Vertical, radiant, and itself a devotional object in works such as the Hours of Bonn de Luxembourg, which I'm showing you here. In Christian imagination, the wound is a sign of Christ's sacrificial love and the means by which the faithful receive eternal life through his blood. In the manuscript, the sword within the red mandorla completes the wound analogy. Just as Christ's body had to be broken down so that divine love could be made available to the faithful, so too must matter and the soul be dissolved in Negretto and then heated, cut, and laid open, rubetto, for divine love to take hold. In the alchemical logic of the Aurora, Negretto and rubetto are sequential stages through which matter, analogous to the soul, must pass. But in the image, rubetto does not replace or rise after Negretto. Instead, rubetto is held within Negretto. The black angel houses the red mandorla, making blackness the chamber in which divine love takes root. Blackness becomes the vessel through which love is born, the interior space where the heat of transformation is kindled, the site where the soul begins to be remade. Albedo marks the final stage of the soul's metamorphosis, the moment when it becomes pure and fit to receive the light of God. Illuminated by sacred wisdom and granted peace in the divine. Yet the Zurich author is careful to insist that this whiteness is neither simple nor self-sufficient. Quote, "For if the soul were to forget the fragility of Negretto, it would fall into pride. And if it lacks the heat of Rebetto, it grows cold into spiritual dullness. Therefore, it is necessary to retain the memory of Negretto and guard the heat of Rebetto so that Albedo may be true and complete," end quote. In this framework, Albedo whiteness is radiant and light-filled, but never absolute. It cannot exist without the dissolving darkness of Negretto or the fiery remaking of Rebetto. Whiteness here is not a purified erasure of the earlier stages, but a state that must hold them in grateful remembrance. The angel's white garment visualizes Albedo's dependent, inherently fragile state. The fabric clings to her body, catching the torque of her muscles and the swing of movement. But it is also just that, fabric. An outer layer that can be slipped on or off, its brightness contingent and easily lost. Medieval artists often use white clothes on black figures to signal the possibility of conversion. In the Arena Chapel, for instance, that I show you here, Justin dresses the black Roman soldier who scourges Christ in a white tunic, which gestures toward the prospect of conversion. The color evokes baptismal purity, recalling Ambrose's gloss on Psalm 51, quote, "Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow," end quote. The sin of the neophyte must be cleansed of its sin, blackness, so that it may be pure, white. The Aurora's logic, however, is different. Here, the white garment does not denote a completed passage from sin to innocence. It marks instead a provisional state. The clarity of Albedo that the text insists must be continually safeguarded, lest it fade. The garment's very ephemerality, its ability to be lifted, shed, discarded, expresses Albedo's tenuous hold. What is intrinsic to the angle is not whiteness, but blackness, her dark skin, which cannot be removed, because the visual ground, and it becomes the visual ground of the entire operation. Albedo can shimmer only because Negretto endures beneath. The stable and necessary condition that both supports and can outlast the fleeting luminosity of the white garment. In the medieval world, angels were wayfinders, guardians, mourners, and enforcers. They heralded divine messages, protected the faithful, and appeared at moments of profound sorrow or revelation. In scenes like the Lamentation, the angels' bodies mimicked the intensity of divine grief, reflecting the heaven's own mourning. They demarcated sanctity. Whoever or whatever they hovered near became marked as holy. Though no medieval viewer imagined becoming an angel, angels were nevertheless crafted to be emotionally and visually legible, figures through whom believers could orient themselves towards holiness. As intermediaries between the divine and the earthly, they guided believers through sacred spaces and sacred stories, bringing heaven close even as they maintained the necessary distance between God and humanity. Because angels occupy this charged space, both exalted and familiar, their appearance mattered. Their alabaster skin, their blonde or light brown hair, their luminous garments, and often their white robes collectively signaled that spiritual purity was white as the driven snow. These images held up whiteness both physiognomically and spiritually as an ideal, a devotional horizon toward which believers oriented themselves. Angelic whiteness thus condensed sanctity into a visible form, making holiness legible at a glance. Crucially, this visual grammar worked through recognition. The angel's white body mirrored the medieval viewer's own, creating a powerful economy of identification. The angel did not offer equivalence, but proximity. A figure close enough to resemble, yet exalted enough to remain aspirational. This is what made the system so effective and so insidious. By aligning sanctity with the physiognomic of white Europeans, angelic imagery naturalized a racial ideal of holiness, allowing viewers to see their own bodies reflected in divine purity. The Black Angel of the Aurora carcinogens ruptures the entire visual and theological economy. Her appearance unsettles the assumption that sanctity must be white, not by rejecting angelic authority, but by reworking its terms. Her blackness is not racial, but hermeneutic, an alchemical and spiritual condition rather than a marker of African identity. In this form, blackness becomes the condition of the soul itself, a stage of dissolution and remaking through which all believers must pass. Where traditional angelic imagery offered identification through resemblance, the Aurora's angel offers identification through a shared vulnerability. She reflects not perfected bodies, but broken open ones, rendering darkness not an exclusion or sin, but as the necessary descent that makes illumination possible. In the alchemical logic of the aurora, it is by being dissolved in blackness that the soul ascends. Contemporary theorist Fred Moten offers a framework that helps illuminate what is at stake when blackness appears not as negation, but as possibility. In Black and Blur, he describes blackness as a generative condition, a state of being in the break, where the self is unsettled, opened, or fractured, and where new modes of relation and sociality can emerge. This break is not solely destructive. It becomes the ground of improvisation, creativity, and alternative ways of being with others. For Moten, blackness names the ongoing practice of making life in the midst of rupture, a condition in which new forms of care, entanglement, and imagination take shape. His work reveals that the very state we are taught to fear or conceal may instead be the site from which possibility grows. If Moten helps us understand blackness as this generative break, a site where relation and possibility are made anew, the Black Angel becomes a rare premodern visualization of that condition, articulated in pigment rather than theory. In a world where medieval theology routinely casts blackness as sin, lack, or distance from God, her presence refuses that logic outright. She is unmistakably angelic, radiant, authoritative, yet marked by the very darkness commentators associated with moral failure. In the aurora, however, darkness is not a stain, but the alchemical beginning. Her body signals that the state medieval viewers most feared, the humbled, broken open self, is precisely the threshold of becoming. If we take seriously the sequence in which Negretto precedes Albedo, then her image suggests that the soul's darkness, its faltering, its confrontation with its own fragility, is not an obstacle to change, but the condition that makes it possible. To say that we all are, hermeneutically speaking, Black, is not to erase racial specificity. It is to name a shared movement through unmaking, through the scent that enables reconstitution. And in a moment marked by turmoil and a staggering failure of empathy, this angel urges us to imagine an hermeneutic of Blackness in which darkness is not the end, but the space from which transformation begins. Thank you.